Hey everybody, it's Jeremy Stover back here doing another AngularJs tutorial. This one is not going to be about Ionic, it is going to be about what you see on the screen, which is the proper way to do HTTP requests with AngularJS. This tutorial is going to cover promises and the most common HTTP verbs, which would be post, get, and delete. At least those are the ones that I use most. Update is also very common, but I don't necessarily use that one as much. So let us begin. As you see right here, we just have a normal HTML page. I have pre-created the function, or the controllers and services that I'm going to be using, but I'll walk you through everything that we need. Alright, so let's do this. Alright, so sorry, I have two things open right now. Folder for project. Alright, so I went ahead and created a RESTful API just for this tutorial. And I'll be doing a tutorial on that eventually, but it will not be on the same channel. I'll link to it at some point. But we're basically just building a task list. So we have our get, post, a toggle, which I haven't tested, so we probably won't even be implementing that, and then a delete. But let's get down to it, and I'll start explaining everything that we need. So proper HTTP requests or any communication with an outside server for with AngularJS. Since we're sticking with MVC and trying to keep everything modular, we are going to have a service that is handling holding onto our objects, and it also handles communicating back and forth between the RESTful API. So inside of the service, we're going to include cache HTTP, and I assume that you guys already know how to build services, or at least start service build. But we're going to need a couple things. We're going to need cache HTTP, cache queue, which is for the promises. This one holds all of our HTTP verbs and all the functions. This one is basically a promise library built into AngularJS, and we're including root scope here for, if you look inside of this, we are declaring our endpoints globally, so we can grab it from any function just in case we create another service. And with that, we only have to change it once. Let's say if we go to production, like a production server, when we go to change this variable right here, we don't have to change it in 10 different services, which can be error prone rather, when you're switching back and forth between production and staging servers. So, let's save this out really quick. Yes. All right. So the first thing that we're going to do is let's talk about verbs, HTTP verbs, and kind of how they work with promises, etc. So what a promise is imagine you. I actually read this from somewhere, and I will link to where I read it because it's pretty genius. Imagine you plan to go out fishing or camping or something like that, and the only way that you could see the weather, imagining that there's no weather.com or something like that, is going to the top of this gigantic hill in your town to see what the weather's like on the horizon. So normally, you'd have to walk all the way up that hill, which could take like an hour or 2 hours, and then go see the weather. And if it's bad, then by the time you get back down, the weather could be completely different, or you've wasted 4 hours of your time, or 2 hours, depending on how long it takes to get up that hill. So what a promise would be is, all right, you're preparing to go camping or fishing or something like that, and you have like a son or a messenger boy or something, and you're like, hey, go up that hill for me. I'm going to prepare to go camping or fishing, and you go up the hill, check the weather, and then come back down while I'm preparing. So you can still prepare all your stuff to go, and then by the time you get back, you know whether it's good or not, and you haven't wasted 4 hours or 2 hours because you've been preparing that entire time. So that's the general sense of a promise. And I'll show you exactly how to implement that and why it's so useful. So first thing that I always do when I'm creating a service is I do var name of the service equals this. So it's just taking the current scope and setting it to a variable. And I'll show you why it kind of helps keep everything looking object-oriented. And then we're just going to return this entire scope. All right, so we're going to create a couple functions that tie directly to HTTP verbs. So we're going to do task dot get all tasks. So just to get all tasks equals function. So you can see already that this function is going to be a child of the task object. So when we return this task object down here, you'll be able to call all those things back and forth. And there's a couple ways to do this, but this is just the way that I like, and it works the best in my opinion. So a couple things that this needs. It does not need anything passed in the parameters, because you're just getting a list of all the tasks that are in the database. All right. So what you're going to do to instantiate a promise with cache q is, let's create a variable. You can name this whatever you want, but I do var defer equals cache q dot defer, which is a function, and then right at the bottom you just return defer dot promise, which is not a function, it's just a normal old object. All right, so now that we have that, what that's going to do is no matter what we put in here, it'll return that promise, and then with what we're going to do, we can actually say, hey, this promise was successful, as in your attempt is successful or your attempt failed, all asynchronously. So what we're going to do is we're going to call this cache HTTP, and we're going to do .get, and it's going to be cache root scope .endpoint plus, I believe it's just slash tasks. All right, so this doesn't take. Okay, so let's define this a little bit. When you do a get, you could technically do a post to do a get as well. It's all about keeping things semantic, meaning it's easier to read. So when you're doing a .get, you're not changing anything. You're just getting a list of the information that already exists. So when you're doing an cache HTTP.get, if you want to pass any parameters in there, so let's say you want to get a task by a specific ID or task by a specific name, you'd have to send it in as a query, which would be question mark task ID equals, and then plus whatever the ID is. It's going to be a variable that you pass in right here. But we're not doing that for this, obviously. So let's get rid of that. All right, so HTTP has kind of a promise system, but it doesn't really float well when you're passing it around very often, or when you're passing it around through different controllers. So what we're going to do is HTTP has a .success, and that takes a callback function. If you don't know what a callback function is, then you can search on YouTube for that. But that callback function gets passed in a response from the success object. So basically, anytime you get like a 200 or any other success HTTP code, it will call the success function, and usually a response is passed, or whatever the API decides to pass back will be passed into this response. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do defer.resolve, which is the successful promise function, and we're just going to resolve the response. As in this, whatever the API sends us back, we're going to resolve it. And what will happen is this defer.resolve, when this succeeds, so that could take like a minute or an hour or whatever, whenever that succeeds, it'll pass it down to the promise, and then I'll show you how to access that function. We're also going to handle error. So it has .success and .error. Both of those take callback functions. And this one has this one has two parameters. And again, you can name these whatever you want. You can name these response. I just happen to have naming paradigm, which is res, and then error, and then the error function passes two parameters, error and status. So I do ERR and status, and then those are available in this function. And then all I have to do is defer. Sorry, motorcycles driving down my street. Defer.reject, and then we're just going to pass down that error. So this is literally all you need to write a very clean, nice HTTP function. You don't want to cloud these things up. You want all of the actual functionality to be passed in through this promise. Now, the only thing that you could argue in this sense would be if you wanted to keep your whatever your task list object or whatever object you're passing around, if you want to hold it in the task service, which is a good idea, before you resolve that function, you would do task task list equals res. So now now task is holding on to that response, but you can also pass it along and do whatever you'd like. All right, so that's it. We'll actually keep that there. We'll use it later. So now what we need to do is we need to do a create task function. So this one's going to be task.create task equals function. Remember, this is a child of the task object. Keeping things object oriented, which is good. Defer equals cache q dot defer function return defer dot promise. Alright, so create task will actually just take a task object. And this is really up to you and your backend programmers, or if you're the backend programmer. It really depends on if you want to handle validation and error handling on the front end or the back end or both. If you're doing something complicated like a payment form, something that's handling money or handling very sensitive information, you want to handle it on both sides so you don't cloud up the back end, the API, the RESTful API, whatever you're using, and you also make sure that anything like an invalid credit card, whatever you can see, like if you put a letter in a credit card number, you want the user to see that immediately instead of having to wait for the server to go out and then come back in and then have them re-enter it. It'd be awesome, or it's so much better of a user experience is if they're typing and they mess something up and immediately flashes red and be like, hey, fix this, it's wrong. Sorry, tangent. Okay, so let's create this really quick. http.post. So the difference between post, let's get everything set up here, sorry. Dot endpoint plus, I'm going to have to look at server.js, see post / new capital T task. Alright, so / new task. So the difference between post and get is post, if you remember, takes that query which starts with a question mark. Post actually can take a payload, which they're both payloads, but this one's not necessarily query. So with this one, you can actually just pass an entire object in there, which we will do as task. We are going to let the server do the error handling, which means like you didn't pass in a description for the task, you didn't pass in a title for the task. It will error out, it'll hit this .error function, and it'll send a message. So it would be error.message would be please enter a description. So we're just passing those along. .success, which again is takes a callback function with a response. Then, oh yeah, resolve res. Again, I could easily just copy and paste this, but I know I learn better when I have to type things out, so if you're just watching me do the tedium of typing things out, whether or not you're paying attention, maybe your brains will kind of absorb it a little bit better. So, for.object error. Alright, we're all done there. So, let's do the delete as well. Just for posterity's sake, I'm going to do task.delete task function. Takes an ID, so the ID that is assigned by the server to that task item. So usually, especially when you're using Express, it'll always associate a unique ID with whatever you're creating, whatever row you're creating, and it depends on every row in a table. It starts out at 0. So like if you're creating like a new table, that ID starts at 0 and goes on, so you don't have these weird convoluted things and you get up to 1 million, like an ID of 1 million in like a day, which would be ridiculous. So what we're going to do is, like always, defer equals q.defer. And if you guys don't know the way scoping works in AngularJS, this var defer is not the same var defer as all of these other two functions has rather. Since it's inside of the scope of this function, unless we're declaring it as unless we declare it outside of all these functions, it is local to this. So this var defer is local to this entire function, which is good because if it wasn't, then you'd have to like make really crazy names for everything. You'd have like defer 1, defer 2, defer 3. It'd just get really nasty and really bad. So back onto it. Defer dot promise, which is an object. All right, I'm going to do cache http dot. Again, this is a verb, an HTTP verb that already exists. Obviously, JavaScript has a delete function. This is definitely not the same thing, but it'll still highlight most likely in your text editor. So root scope dot endpoint plus. I have to look at the endpoint for this one. Whenever you're working with a team, especially with backend developers, they should write documentation on all of the endpoints that you have, what they're expecting, what's going to be returned, and most of the time even like response times expected, so you can do your job. So for me, since I wrote it, I know exactly what goes in there. But for the most part, you should have like Confluence or GitHub wikis that explain every single endpoint you have, groupings of endpoints, and exactly what they need to be used correctly. And a lot of the time when you're talking product, if you're developing an application, you're talking product with your product manager. Whenever you're creating the drawing of the UI or something like that, just mentally in your head, after you study these endpoints, be like, okay, this endpoint goes there, this endpoint goes there, does this, etc., etc. It makes your life so much easier. It's a little hard at first. I know it was for me, but just keep on working at it. Keep on trying to get yourself into that mindset. So, all right. So delete task is the next one. Plus slash task, and it takes task ID equals ID. It needs to be plus ID. Also, if you didn't know JavaScript as well, I have a string here, and this is going to be an integer. What happens when you add a string and an integer is it will cast that integer to a string and then append it onto the end of the string, which is perfect because obviously you can't add like a word, like you can't add a number to a word like mathematically. So casting is fantastic. Obviously there's things you can't task, so I will link to a video called WAT that describes that perfectly. All right. We're going to do that success, get my mind in the right place again, function response, defer dot resolve res error, function error status, defer dot reject error. All right, so these are the three things that we're going to need majorly. Eventually, you need something that lets you toggle one of the tasks done or not done, which we will be getting that value back from the server. But just for this, we're doing the three major things, which is get, post, and delete, which is good enough for this tutorial. So we're going to save that out. I'm going to hear a little boop. Which is, there we go, which is my server restarting because I have live reload built in. And the next thing we need to do is we need to hook up our controllers, which we have two controllers, and I'll explain why we have two of them. So right now we have a task controller right here, which is the controller bound to this page, this main page that is set up. And that takes two things. It takes modal, or cache modal, which I will describe in a minute, and task, which is a service that we were just working on. Remember, task right there, we describe it, which lets us pull it in right here. Cache modal is part of Angular -UI bootstrap, which is just bootstrap directives for Angular, and it has a built-in version of their bootstrap modal. It's just like a jQuery modal that pops up, but it integrates promises into the modal. Again, promises aren't just for HTTP requests. The promise for cache modal is if you close it, you can see how it's closed, whether it's closed by force, whether it has succeeded, failed, etc. And that promise will be passed back, just like that defer.resolve and defer.reject. And again, I'll show you how to actually use those because it's really friggin' nifty. So we're going to need a couple things. First, we're going to need a init function because that's good practice. You could very easily just declare all your vars out here, but it's kind of dirty and it gets very convoluted very quickly. So what we're going to do is, and this helps us call functions after the piece of software is loaded, but it's still written out at the top of our file, so we know exactly what happens right when it starts, or right when the piece of software or the page actually starts loading up. So that actually might not have made any sense at all. I hope it did. We call that function, and that's all we need for startup for this controller. But what we're going to do is we are going to create some functions to match up with this task. So what we need is we need scope.getAll equals function. And what we're going to do here is just do task.getAll. I believe it's get all tasks. If I'm not mistaken. Yes. Get all tasks. All right. This is. I'm going to show you guys exactly how to use promises after you've already created the base of the functions. So we've called this get all tasks, and if you remember, it returns a promise, which is that return defer.promise. And what happens with that is after this, you can actually call .then. And remember, since we didn't add a semicolon here, we can actually append other object definitions afterwards. So it'll call .then of this function. So this function returns a promise. The promise has a function called then. And with that, .then takes 3 parameters. They're all callback functions. We're only going to be using 2 of them. And I'll describe them in 1 second. Function res is when it succeeds. So the first out of the 3 callback functions is a success. And then function, the second out of the 3 is failed or error. And then the third is a message, which I haven't found a reason to use yet. If anyone wants to throw a comment in there and tell me how they use it, then go right ahead. That'd be awesome. So what we can do here is we can actually tell or decide what to do when those functions return on a use-by-use basis. So you can describe it up here like we're doing. We're setting the task list here. But what if we want to have like controller-specific logic for when these things finish, which is exactly why these promises exist. So you can pass those things along, and we can decide I want to reload this directive for this controller only when we call that service HTTP call, or whatever you want, doesn't matter. It just makes your piece of software so much more modular. So here, we're actually not going to do anything because right up here, we're going to do scope.tasks equals task.task list. And since task list is an object, it will bind by reference instead of value. So it will change along the way. I believe, actually, that's a good question. We'll have to see. I might have to bind it differently. But we don't need to do anything in these functions because if you remember, we're already setting the task list up here, and we're binding these two together. So all we have to do is call that get all tasks right when the piece of software out here. We'll do this. Then, just for posterity's sake, make sure the object exists. Right when the piece of software starts, we're going to call get all. All right, perfect. Now we need a delete function. Scope.delete task. This is going to take an ID for a very specific reason. That's not how you do that. Equals function ID, and it's just going to call task.delete task, and we're going to pass that ID in. Function res. All right, so another thing that we want to do, we're going to keep this specific to this controller and not the service, is when you successfully delete something, we really should call the getAll function. So you delete something and then you refresh your data, make sure your data matches exactly what the server has. And then error, we are not going to do anything with the error just yet. We'll just, no, whatever. Success and error. All right, perfect. All right, so now that we have those two things, we're not going to build create task into this function. We're actually going to build it into that modal that I spoke of. In fact, let's build that out as well. So we're going to do scope.create equals function. We're not passing any parameters here. All we're doing is var modal instance equals cache modal.open. So I'll do a full tutorial on how to use a lot of the Angular UI directives, but we're just using modal or cache modal for now. So I'll just kind of give you a quick tutorial on that. Cache modal.open takes an object as a parameter, and that object can take a lot of different variables, but I'll go over the ones that we're using here. It takes a template URL, which for us would be /view/create task.html. View/create task.html. It also takes a controller, which for us is here. Oops. Copy. And both of these need to be in quotes. And that's all we need for that. So this basically tells it what it needs to bring up when it opens up that modal. So it'll use this as the view and use this as the controller. Close this off with a semicolon. And then what we can do here is, if you remember I said that cache modal returns a promise. Now, since this is a function, this open function returns an object called result. And result has, or result is a promise. So we can do modal instance dot result. I believe it's that result, not results dot then. And again, that takes 3 functions, which is rest. This is a successful, as in like if you have like OK or cancel, this is OK. Success. Function. We don't care about. We actually don't care about the response in any way. Error. But for both instances, we are going to call scope.getAll, because no matter what, when we close out this modal, we want to make sure that we're matching up with the server regardless of whether you created one successfully or not. It's just good posterity. I know it's hitting the server multiple times, but it's just good practice to make sure that the user sees exactly what is on the server always. And there's a bunch of different ways you can do this. This is just, without using like tunnels, this is a good way. All right. So now that we have that built, we actually have an HTML file for create task already. I'll show you where I got this template, or you could just build it by hand. But now that we have our controller, we really need to start building out this view, which would be this right here. So if you remember, on controller initialization, we are actually getting all of the tasks. So we'll have those right when the page loads up, or shortly after at least. But inside of everything. I'm not going to go through an HTML tutorial, but we're already inside of a container, which is Bootstrap's like row and column container class. So we don't have to declare another container if we did get all weird. But we'll declare a row and then call 6, declaring a call. Or again, I'm not going to go through Bootstrap. This is definitely out of the scope of this tutorial, so I'm just going to write this without explaining it. But I'm just going to create a little container for a little create task button. We'll do this call set 3, and inside of that it's going to be block create task. Inside of that it's going to be data-ng click equals create. If you remember, we created the scope.create function. All scope functions, this is the scope that they're referring to. So you don't have to append cache scope to here. Sorry, there's... Sorry about that. There was siren. I'm in the middle of a city. You don't have to append cache scope to here. Since you're already inside of the scope, all you have to do is call that create function, and that applies to anything that has the word scope in front of it, cache scope. So when you click create task from here, it'll pop up that modal, which we'll actually try out really quick. Create task, bam, I'm a modal, and we click outside of it. But yeah, so since I already built this one out, it accepts a title, a description, and a color for reasons undisclosed. So I'm going to cancel that. This should have an offset. Call large offset 3. Oops. And it's because we are not large. We are, there we go. Alright, so that's sitting in the middle, have a little button there. Next thing we want to do is let's create another row. ES3-call 12. This one is going to contain our actual list of tasks. Again, remember, we're getting all these tasks right off the bat. So we will populate this data with an ng repeat. So I'm going to grab a table because I am lazy. Each task, if you look inside of our server, again, you should have documentation on this. Each task has a title, which is a string, description, which is a string, a color, which is a string, and done, which is a Boolean value, like true or false, if you didn't know. So we're going to have, if you don't know about tables, th is a table head, th description, th, oh, well, no, that's not what we're using it for. What else is there? Title, description, color, and done. Oh, yeah. It actually has th, done, and then th, empty. So what we're going to do here is data-ng-repeat equals task in task list. And what we're going to do is data-ng-style equals color task.color. So if you know anything about CSS, you know color is the word for text. Each of these tasks has a color assigned to it, so you can decide whatever color the text you want to be right when you're creating the task, and it'll save it to the server, so it saves. And that can help you decide things like priority, like if it's red, it's super, like P0, very prioritized. But here we're going to do TD, and it's going to be task.title, TD task.desk. It's desk because that's what I described it as in the server, desk. So that's the object that it's going to pass back. TD, that's not close, so that's going to be input dash checkbox. I'm going to get rid of this label because we don't care about it. And just for fun, we'll keep the checkbox div. And here, if remember we have that blank th, we don't really want a header over this one, but it's going to be button default. Oh, let's do button danger. Button danger. And since we already have font awesome in here, we can actually declare an I class equals fa dash times. It just creates an X. So what it'll do is create a perfectly centered X inside of this button, which should be a perfect square at that point. And what we're going to do is you can actually click this. So data-ng-click equals, what do I call this? Delete task. And remember, we're passing in an ID, so each one of these is passed back with an ID as well. You don't see it here because SQLize automatically creates a unique ID. SQLize is like a Node.js wrapper to MySQL or like Postgres. Yeah, there we go. Or SQLite, whatever. Task.id. All right, so that takes care of that. So when we load the page up the first time, we're literally not going to see anything because we have, if we go in here, we don't have anything. Oh, we actually do have something in there. We got a bug, and I know what that bug is as well. What we're going to do here is we're going to task. See if we have any errors. So debugging practices. Console, first page, no errors. Let's see if we got anything from tasks. Response, it did send something back, but we didn't bind to it correctly. So let's see why. Sublime tests, sublime text, task.task list, get all. Ding, ding, ding. That's why. Problem solved. Bam. So the color that we have for this one right here is black. That's why the text is black and normal. What we can do is delete. If you remember the delete function, it calls delete task with an ID, and then when it successfully resolves, it gets all. In fact, to be happy and productive, you should call it whether or not, even if it fails. So we'll run through a quick creation of a task. Let me make sure all my functions still match up. Oh, I didn't even bother writing it. Okay, so last thing is create a task. My bad, I forgot about this one. This one is going to have, again, scope.init equals function type. And then we are going to call that function at the end of the file. Again, that makes sure that all functions and everything else get loaded first, because bubbling, just do a quick search of JavaScript bubbling. It's not perfect, so you definitely want to make sure that you call this init function after everything has fully loaded. So in the init function, we're going to create an object called scope.task equals object. Inside that object, it's going to have title of empty string, desk of empty string, and this matches exactly up with what the server is expecting. And I'll show you exactly why in a second. Desk, and then color, which is a string, and then done, which will always be false because why would you create a task and have it done immediately? I mean, I'm sure there's a use case, but I don't really care. All right. So if I'm not mistaken, that is all the task contains: title, desk, color, and done. Title, desk, color, and done. So now that we have that, it will actually bind those empty strings to all of these variables. So task.title, task.desk, task.color, and then we don't even show done because why would you want that? Or whatever. Okay, so next thing you sorry guys, scope. Next thing you need is the submit function. Scope.submit equals function. We're not passing anything in here because we're literally just passing this task back. And then we're handling errors on the server side. So you don't have to check if title's been filled out or desk has been filled out because the server will check for you. If you've built that in, but a lot of the time you should build it on both sides, just to be careful. So on this one, we are doing, since we've already included task here, bam, task.create, what is it, create task? I don't remember off the top of my head. Yes, create task. Which will take scope.task. And as always, then function, you don't really care about the response. What we care about is when it succeeds or fails. Oh, there you go, in cache. Modal instance dot close. When it succeeds or fails, we're just going to close it. Why not? You've successfully done something or messed something up. Or rather, here, we won't close it out if it fails. We'll close it out if it succeeds. So the next one is let's do failed. So that's going to be blatant. All right, so if it succeeds, then it'll close it. And if you remember, when this thing closes, it will call that get all. So no matter what, it's going to refresh the page. And this is actually literally all we need. We can create tasks, let it refresh, bam. Create task, bam, bam. Give it a color of pink. Submit. Bam, refresh the page with all of the things that we have. We can delete again. Bam, tasks. We have created a cool thing. Don't ya think? And we'll make this. Let's go salmon. It's kind of a salmon-y color, isn't it? Yeah, salmon's cool. Alright, and just to clarify, we'll do one, make that green, submit, two, that the color of the shirt that I'm wearing. Alright, so just to clarify, let's jump into SQL Pro, refresh this, and it is actually posting to our database. And when you're on production, I mean, it's going to work the exact same way. You'll just have a node server running, or whatever you plan to use. If you're using like Scala, then it's going to be the exact same tutorial. You're just going to have to write in a Scala backend that communicates with the database. But passes in the color, and then SQLize automatically makes SQL format date string with when it was created and whenever it gets updated or changed. And then done is, since it's the Boolean, it's 0 or 1, like we said earlier, and this is a tiny int. So something like this isn't going to be taking up a lot of space. These, however, are large strings. So that is the end of the tutorial, I believe. I'm just gonna go in here and delete all these, close them out, bam. Say that's done, even though it doesn't do anything. Refresh the page and it doesn't do anything. We'll leave the salmon one. All right. So I will leave a list of links to all the resources that I use in this tutorial. Hopefully I covered everything that you guys needed to know. And if I haven't, then please yell at me. I've done it before. I will redo the entire tutorial just to make sure that you guys get exactly what you need. All right, thank you very much, and I hope you guys have a very, very, very AngularJS happy day. Bye-bye.